My name is Andy Hall. I'm a science and technology policy researcher working for Australia's National Science Agency, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation. I'm sorry I'm not able to be with you today for technical reasons, and I haven't been able to hear the previous presentation that I'm going to respond to, but I have read the abstract and seen an early draft of the presentation, and I hope my comments do it justice. As a little bit of context for the points that I'm going to make today, like many researchers of my generation in the agriculture field, we're seeing ideas of farmer participatory research come round for a second time. We experimented with these ideas in the 1990s, and perhaps earlier for some of us. And these ideas, while great, failed to take off in a mainstream way. So that's a little bit of the context for some of the comments that I'm going to make. So some insights from the presentation and the topic generally. I think we can see that digital technology is important for embedding farmers in information networks and doing so not just as passive recipients, but also as active contributors to a broad pool of agricultural knowledge from both scientific and empirical sources. In other words, from other farmers as well as science. But I think what the presentation also says quite clearly is that this innovation, this use of digital technology to enable farmers to access and share knowledge is not just a purely technological phenomena. It's not just about the digital technology, but it's also about the institutional and policy changes that are needed to enable that technology to be used. So there's a number of examples of that in the presentation. So there's a whole raft of institutional innovations which have been important in enabling the technology use and its direction to the needs of farmers. These institutional innovations include governance arrangements, interoperability standards, the development of individual and organizational capabilities, and new patterns of partnership. And these have been an essential ingredient. We're also seeing the importance of policy innovation in this whole story. So policies to do with regulation, infrastructure investment, all critical in creating this enabling environment for technologies for digital technologies to be used effectively and responsibly deployed. So I want to make three points around the institutional and policy dimensions of OFE, which I think are going to be important as we move forward and think about how to mainstream these approaches. So the first is a clutch of issues around reframing the science-farmer interface. We know that OFE is a set of tools for helping helping work with farmers in their experimentation process, but there's also a bigger challenge of reframing this interface between formal science and farmers. And what's going to be required is a set of institutional innovations, institutional designs and policies with a small p, organizational policies, that help structure the relationship between formal science and farmers as a central element of the research process. So there's a number of issues at stake which are going to need to be given some thought. Some of it is about disciplinary mixes and boundaries. What sorts of disciplines do we need to enable that experimentation with farmers? It clearly goes beyond biophysical disciplines. We need to think about research methods and ways problems and research inquiries are framed and who they're framed by. Can farmers help reframe science inquiries and send them in new directions? Professional reward systems and science excellence standards. If we're working in close collaboration with partners, it's not just about having excellent science. It's also about using science to answer questions that farmers are interested in, and that becomes a different metric and professional standard. And then finally, there's an issue of this balance between frontier knowledge and the impact of research in notions of excellence. So we need both, and we need to think how to manage these. So that's quite a broad category of institutional and policy changes that are going to be required to both enable and support a new way of farmers working, a new way of science working with farmers. And certainly in the previous farmer participatory research era, we saw that it was these types of institutional and policy issues which got in the way of institutionalizing participatory research, and instead it became a set of tools rather than an institutional imperative. The second issue that I want to talk to is the need to think about reframing agricultural innovation systems so that they can accommodate OFE. There's a number of issues here, and some of this is about the way the innovation systems need to respond to the way that OFE forms a new source of innovation within the broader agricultural innovation system. And the issues at hand are that the institutional and policy innovations are going to be needed to support this source of innovation and help leverage its potentially transformative effects on the broader innovation landscape. At the moment, in a sense, innovation systems are blind to these modes of innovation that are emerging around OFE. There needs to be some thought given to how they can be incorporated into the innovation system and creating opportunities for OFE to try and transform the way the innovation system works more generally. And that's particularly important where OFE is starting to devise new pathways to deal with sustainability. So I mean, there's a number of dimensions to this which need to be given some thought. Changing the way innovation priorities are set and by who, and the way strategic directions are set. So very much a governance of the innovation system. Building bridges between OFE and other modes of agricultural innovation. There's always going to be a mosaic of different types of innovation approach. OFE is only going to be one. It doesn't mean that more traditional forms of research and technology development and commercialization are also not important, but building bridges between these different modes helps the transformative effects of OFE. And the third one is that the innovation system needs to think about new patterns of funding and collaboration and accommodating new and different roles of science. So these new and different roles of science might be about being more in the realm of anticipatory studies and broad-scale analysis of trade-offs and unexpected impacts, which might not be in the realm of OFE. So it shifts where some of the emphasis within the formal system, science system sits. But again, my point of making this is that it's a much broader scale set of institutional and policy challenges that go beyond the farm scale, go beyond the research organization scale, and actually are about how the innovation system works as a whole and can be retooled to deal with the emergence of OFE. My third point is about responsible innovation, and particularly how economic and social value of data and ideas from OFE can be shared. I think we have to be very clear that innovation is never socially neutral. Digital technology brings concerns about the uses to which it is deployed and the winners and losers in that process. And this need to balance using it to help farmers rather than it being diverted to support vested interests. And we know that this is a particular issue with the collection of data from farm through digital agricultural technology more generally. And I think in the case of OFE, it raises new questions about governance and intellectual property arrangements because of the way it intersects with commercial interests and possibilities associated with land management. For example, the market value of provenance, land stewardship, and carbon sequestration. So some really careful thoughts need to be given about the sorts of institutional innovations which will be needed to fairly distribute benefits in the co-innovation process that is implied by OFE. So a clutch of things about valuing information and data, which currently there's been very little progress made on. So my last point, really, which is to wrap up, is to why is attention to the institutional and policy dimensions of OFE so critically important? In many senses, the sorts of policy and institutional innovation challenges that I've discussed are widely recognized in the literature. However, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, what we learned from previous experiences with farmer participatory research, if these issues are not addressed, OFE will remain a niche activity that fails to fulfill its transformational potential. My view is that moving forward, these institutional and policy dimensions of OFE will need to be given explicit attention through analysis, through experimentation, and through evidence-based dialogue with critical decision makers and stakeholders in the innovation system. So the project of OFE, to make it mainstream, needs to be working at these different levels of the system that we live in, at the farm level, at the organizational level, and at this broader innovation system level. And that's going to be challenging, but it's going to be essential to really progress the approach and reap its rewards. So that's my final slide. Thank you very much for listening.